Henry II, he's the one who married Eleanor of Aquitaine. Now, one of the things he did was he tried to make uniform law throughout England. I mean, it was like each little shire and each little borough was enforcing its own law. So he appointed judges to enforce his law. And the judges would sometimes make laws. And the nobles said, hey, this makes the judges too powerful. So the king agreed and said after this, a law can only be made if the nobles agree to it. Now, why is this important? Well, this applies because we have given in this country, and I'm going to go on record, too much power to where our judges make all of our moral decisions for us, and our elected officials have no say-so in making any of our moral decisions. Our judges rule like philosopher kings, and they rule with far more tyranny than King George III, whom we rebelled against, ever had. The last time a Supreme Court decision was overturned was the income tax law passed in 1912. We're talking about 106 years. Does that sound like checks and balances to you? 106 years since the Supreme Court decision was overturned by a constitutional amendment. The judges can make, the Supreme Court make a decision 5-4, and Congress has to get 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, and 3/4 of the states to overrun it. Is that balance? Separation of powers? Hardly. If you don't like what I'm saying, you're welcome to. But they can make any decision. They even overturned the Constitution. Well, when? The 15th Amendment spelled out that former slaves, particularly African slaves, could vote. And for 100 years, Africans were denied the right to vote in the South. Why? Because the Supreme Court had ruled that the South would set up a literacy test. To pass the literacy test, you had to have a white skin. I mean, I don't mean to open up old wounds, but this is documented, folks, and most of you probably heard it. A black man with a PhD failed the literacy test one time while an illiterate white man passed it. This actually happened here in the South. Now, of course, hey, but now this is not going on now. I mean, we shouldn't forget it that it happened. We don't want to carry the old wounds with us. We've got to put those old wounds on. The situation has been resolved, but for 100 years, blacks were denied the right to vote, even though the Constitution spelled out they could. So they don't even have to go by the Constitution. They can make any decision they want to about anything they want to, and nobody can predict what they're going to do. And their decisions cannot be overturned. Yes?
Doesn't each state carry their own rules for that? Or was that because that was in the South, right? So they
Yeah, well, okay, the South was where the literacy tests were administered.
right. So that's every state. That's not a
Yeah,
federal
well,
law.
see, but eventually the federal government stepped in and overturned it.
Right, but
So-
initially it wasn't.
It was up to the states.
Right.
So the northern states were allowing them to vote.
Right.
Most states were, but the southern states were not. And again, the Supreme Court ruled that they didn't have to.
Okay.
The history books will give you the exact decision. I don't remember, but there was an exact decision where they was carried to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said that literacy tests could be used. The problem was, I mean, I can understand a real literacy test if everybody were equal. But the literacy test, you only passed if you had a white skin. We know that. And that's what made them unfair. All right. Anyway, he reformed the courts. Now there was another incident. Now in Europe, you had a long-standing battle between church and state. When the smoke finally cleared, folks, I think this is very important because this is another reason I think in the Byzantine Empire, the church was the state and the state was the church. I think that's wrong. In the Muslim world, the mosque is the state and the state is the mosque. But in Europe, the church and state were two separate institutions and they competed with each other. When the smoke finally cleared, the church remained a church and the state ran, they were independent of each other. And I think this is very important because I think this helps explain one thing, why Europe excelled. The state and church remained separate. But there was a time when the state tried to control the church, and the state and church often came into conflict. Now, one of the biggest conflicts that Henry faced was a man named Thomas Becket. Thomas A. Becket. Now, somewhat like the Gracchus brothers, Becket became a martyr like they did, and I can't side with him on the issue. The issue, as far as he was on the wrong side of the issue, but he was a martyr. All right. The issue was who should try clerics who had broken the law. Becket said that the clerics should be tried by the church courts. Henry said no, clerics should be tried by state courts. And they argued over this. Well, backing up a little bit, Henry II appointed Thomas Becket as Archbishop of Canterbury, and folks, here's a big mistake. Today, the church appoints its own officials. And again, I think that's extremely important. It was so bad in Russia that in Russia, the Tsar appointed a church, but then it got to where when Lenin took over, Lenin actually appointed the Patriarch of Moscow. You might not think that's so bad, but yes, it's terrible. But Thomas Becket was appointed by the king to be archbishop, and again, I really think the church should appoint him. Now, here's the problem. Thomas Becket, he'd been a member of the church, yeah, but he was a worldly minded man, and Henry thought, I'll control him. It's a case where you appoint a man, and you have, like for instance, back to the Supreme Court, a lot of presidents have appointed judges, the Supreme Court thinking it'd be one thing, and they get in power and there's something else. When Becket got in power and put on these church robes, he not only was dressed like a church man, but he started to talk like a church man, and worse than that, he started to think like a church man. He was so churchy, in fact, that the Pope put him a letter and said, Mr. Becket, we don't need your controversy. Please cool things down. Well, the controversy went on, and Becket would not back down, would not yield. And finally, someone handed a letter. Henry was sitting around the table eating with a bunch of his knights, and someone handed a letter. Thomas Becket has done this. Henry II threw a fit of rage. He said, "Oh, you dogs who sit around my table." And this king was very hot-tempered. "Can't any of you take care of this upstart priest for me?" He probably was just blowing off steam, but 4 knights got up from the table. They went to visit Thomas Becket. And if you read a detailed account, it was like Becket provoked him to strike. And finally, one of the knights struck Becket in the head with his sword, and his brains were knocked out. This really destroyed Henry temporarily. He had to quit his fight with the church. All of Christendom came down on him. Becket became a martyr. And Henry had to do penance for the rash deed. He was, of course, fairly blamed for the death of Becket. And Becket had to give up his plans to get control of the church and rein in priests. Now today, if a priest or a cleric is accused of a crime, the state tries him, not the church. There are hardly any church courts anymore. The church courts are out of style. But again, in the long run, the church remained a church and the state remained a state. And when our last pope resigned, guess what? The church appointed the pope, which is the way it should have been. I'm saying that even though I myself have already told you I'm not Catholic. But church officials are now appointed by the church. State officials are appointed by each state constitution, according to whatever state that is. All right. The other king, remember, it is King John. You notice I don't call him John the First. King John was so bad that the royal family doesn't name their babies John anymore. The royal family of England. But if there ever is another John, he'll become John the First, and anyway, and the other will become John the Second. King John was wicked, very wicked. But one day he went to France, and when he was in France, his nobles got together. When he got back, the nobles all confronted him to the last man and said, "Your Majesty, we've drawn up a charter. Sign it." When John saw that all the nobles were against him, he signed it. They did not kill him. They didn't intend to. Again, assassinations were rare during the Middle Ages. They simply told him, you can be king still, but there's certain things you're not allowed to do. This document was called the Magna Carta. It simply limited the power of the king. It said to him, you're still king, we'll still obey you, but there are some things, and I think there are about 14 things that the king was not allowed to do. It's in, a lot of people say, thanks to Magna Carta, England still has a king or queen today. France doesn't. Germany doesn't. But the Magna Carta, to quote something, there was a documentary that aired recently. Queen Victoria had 3 grandchildren who had the title of emperor. The Emperor of England, the Kaiser of Germany, and the Tsar of Russia. They were all first cousins. When World War I was over, the only one who still had the title of emperor was England. The Kaiser was forced to abdicate. He became a farmer, an old man, in Holland. The Tsar was lined up with his family and all of them shot dead, and the bodies thrown into a mud puddle and finally dug up 70 years later. King of England, he said, my generals won't even discuss strategy with me. My admirals won't even discuss what they're doing with me. No power at all. But at the end of the war, he was still emperor. I'm talking about George V. He was still emperor. The other ones were not. But anyway, a lot of the credit might go to the Magna Carta. Now, the other one I want you to remember is Edward I. Edward I. He convened the first Parliament. This was eventually lead to the U.S. Congress. Now, the reason he convened the Parliament was he wanted some money. He needed money, but he felt like if I just impose a tax on the people, they might get upset at me. But he needed money badly. So he said, I know what I'll do. I'll ask all the nobles to come and meet me at London, meet me in the palace, and I'll tell them why I need this money. So he sent a letter to all the noblemen in his realm, invited them to meet with him, and this was the Parliament, the first Parliament. It was only the nobles. Later the commoners took over. And he set it out for here, I need money to do this, I need this, I need this. The nobles approved of it. He raised the tax. And he got, with the nobles' backing, he got the money that he needed. And to this day now, you may know, in our country, in our Constitution, we have 2 houses, the lower house of representatives and the upper house, the Senate. All tax bills originate in which house? Anybody know? Every tax measure must originate in the House of Representatives, yeah. Not the Senate, the House of Representatives. Again, the House passes it first. Now, the Senate does not have to approve of what the House passes, but the Senate cannot originate a tax law. They have to wait, and whatever the House sends to them, they can either approve it or disapprove it. If they approve it, it goes on to the President. If they disapprove it, they get a coordinating committee and try to iron out the differences. But all tax revenue, or all tax bills, must originate in the House of Representatives. Again, this is representation and taxes became a big issue. In fact, it became a big issue that was to lead to our breaking away from Great Britain. I want to say about the American Revolution. We were asking King George III only to enforce laws and keep laws that have been on the books for hundreds of years. It was not a radical revolution to get new ideas. The law of taxation representation had been on the English books since the 1200s, early 1200s. And this was 1776, 550 more than 550, maybe closer to 600 years. And the law against quartering of troops in peacetime without the consent of the owner, that had been on the books too. They were trying to get the King of England to treat we colonials just like they were being treated in England. But the problem was we were 4,000 miles away and the king felt like he couldn't afford it. So we rebelled and we won. All right. Now France. With France, and I'm about to have to give a break, and I think I'll do that right now. Be back, folk, at 11:30. Those of you who took tests, don't look for the grade till tomorrow afternoon.
is, I will.
I'm just trying to understand. It's,